Hey everybody, welcome to the briefing room on ABC News Live. I'm Devin Dwyer here in our Washington newsroom. Great to have you with us on this Wednesday. It's a very busy day here in the newsroom. We're tracking Hurricane Dorian now moving up the coast towards the Carolinas and Georgia. It is bearing down right now with active winds, wind bands coming on shore there, finally moving away from the Florida coast and, of course, leaving much devastation down in the Bahamas. Let's get the latest on the track right now and upcoming impacts from ABC meteorologist Greg Dutra, who's up in New York right now. Greg, you're in our weather center. Where is this thing headed right now?
It looks like it's headed toward the Carolinas. Now, it doesn't have to make landfall on the Carolinas to have wide-reaching impacts, but it is still on its way up there, and it's going to rake dangerously close to the Carolina coast. We are expecting some large storm surges from this, too. Right now, a Category 2, winds 105. Yes, it has weakened from that behemoth storm system that we saw move across the Abaco and Grand Bahama Island, but do not sleep on this. 2 is still a very intense hurricane, and it's moving so close to shore that we are going to see those big impacts. 4 to 7 foot storm surges in the low country. They call it the low country for a reason. That's a dangerous cocktail. You've got low terrain, you've got high storm surge, high winds, and also high rainfall totals. It is going to cause some coastal flooding here, and we're really targeting Thursday as the day that we see the biggest event. So we can't let this out of our sight just yet. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of news about flooding and probably some swift water rescues coming through the next couple of days.
Yeah, this thing is really a slow mover, but at least picking up a couple miles an hour. Greg Dutra in New York, thank you so much. State and local officials down there preparing for the storm, as Greg was talking about, mobilizing resources at all levels, including the federal government, to assist with rescues. That has meant the Department of Homeland Security has made an abrupt announcement on how they will treat undocumented immigrants in this country. Here's Homeland Security Secretary Kevin McAleenan a short time ago.
There will be no routine immigration enforcement during this storm or in the immediate aftermath of this storm. People do not have to worry about immigration enforcement. They need to go get the help they need and seek safety from this very dangerous storm.
Many of those CBP and DHS resources being deployed to the Bahamas at this hour, rescuing dozens of people in the last 24 hours there. President Trump in the Oval Office just minutes ago addressed U.S. recovery efforts in the Bahamas. Here's what he had to say.
A big section of the Bahamas was hit like few people have seen before, but we're helping in a humanitarian way. We've been asked to help by the government of the Bahamas, and we have numerous helicopters, and we're sending some people to give them a hand, and they need a big hand. What's going on over there is incredible. Few people have seen anything like that. Although I must tell you, over the years, there have been some hurricanes that were bigger and stronger and more powerful that hit us very hard also.
ABC News has witnessed the devastation in the Bahamas firsthand. Our team of Marcus Moore, Chris Donato, Scott Schulman evacuated from the island overnight, Abaco Island, I should say, which was hit the hardest in the storm. They were able to get some video out, which we are now seeing for the first time, of what it was like on that island as the eye of a Category 5 hurricane struck. Here's a little bit of their reporting just coming in.
One of the things we're waiting for right now is for the eye of the storm to approach the center of the storm, which ironically, and many meteorologists and people who enjoy weather find it fascinating. When you get those wind gusts, you can feel the pressure change, and your ears kind of pop. That's happened several times.
All right, so we have moved into another safe room. We're in a it looks like a utility closet that we moved to. This is producer Chris Donato, and we've got a concrete ceiling, and the walls are thick, so we think we're in a good spot. But we wanted to get out of the place that we were in because we feared that since the winds are coming from a different direction, this time it might take the roof off. And you can hear that wind. It is absolutely incredible.
And the winds just have not let up. I mean, look, the winds are so strong, it's almost appearing to rip the door open. You can see daylight at the top of the cracks there. It seems that lock is barely holding on. And then look down to the ground there. That water cascading into this condo. Absolutely incredible. And you can see that wind trying to push the door open. And we've also heard bits and pieces of debris hitting the door as well, but that lock holding it shut, but the water still escaping through the bottom, you can see there. We tried our best when this first started to try to keep the water from getting in, but now, I mean, look at that. It's like just ponding throughout the condo here.
So this was the first floor of our condo. You can see.
It was so nice.
Wow, it was gorgeous in here. That bathroom's destroyed. The laundry room. Look at the vent on the ceiling for the laundry room. That window blown out in the left corner. Furniture just tossed.
Find the vegan, but that was what's on the other end.
That's what's left of the vegan. You can see that door gone. Wow. The fridge completely moved. Just what was in the fridge is out of the fridge. That whatever AC vent gone.
Like filled with water.
The balcony completely gone.
An extraordinary look just coming in from what it was like in the eye of Hurricane Dorian in the thick of things just a couple of days ago. Our thanks again to our team, Marcus Moore, Chris Donato, and Scott Schulman, who have now evacuated to a different part of the Bahamas. Next to the race for 2020 and the climate change primary, all but 3 of the Democratic candidates have released comprehensive climate change plans ahead of tonight's debate on a cable channel on the issue of climate change. Most are sweeping, ambitious, expensive, many drawing from plans within the Green New Deal. All of them aim to curb toxic emissions, improve our water and air quality in this country. But we wanted to know, how are the plans different? How should you know if climate is important to you? Which candidate to support when it comes to issues of climate? To help us dig deeper, I'm joined now by Craig Oster with the League of Conservation Voters. He's here in our D.C. bureau, along with our Deputy Political Director, Mary Alice Parks. Guys, great to have you. We've got a lot to dig into right now. Mary Alice, you have covered this perhaps most extensively here at ABC News. Let's start with where every 2020 candidate agrees.
Well, look, big picture in the Democratic primary, the Democratic Party is trying to position itself as the Green Party. They want to have a very clear contrast with the Republicans. And more unites these Democratic candidates than probably divides them. Across the board, they say they would like to put the United States back into the Paris Climate Accord, that they'd like to put back in place a lot of those environmental regulations and protections of federal lands that this Trump administration has rolled back. If anything, we've seen these Democrats try to one-up each other. It's been almost an arms race to see who can present the biggest, meanest, boldest plan to combat climate change. Just today, Senator Harris released a $10 trillion plan, definitely one of her most comprehensive proposals. That falls a little bit shy of a sweeping plan from Senator Bernie Sanders, which is estimated to cost $16 trillion. And again, there's just a lot of these pretty whopping proposals coming from Democrats as they say that they would be the ones that would tackle this with the most gusto.
So how do we put our minds around these things, Craig, and how are they different? Our producer, John Schlossberg, took a look at all the candidates' plans, big price tags. That's one way they're different. But there also seems to be a fault line along this issue of carbon pollution and what we should do about that. A number of the candidates, and we see them here, support some sort of a carbon tax or a pollution fee on emitters. What should we know about this? Why is there so much difference in the field on this issue?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me to talk about climate change. It's such an important issue, and we know, voters care so much about it. And I think that is part of why all of these candidates are putting out such comprehensive plans. In terms of a carbon fee, that is an important tool in our arsenal to combat climate change. We have to make polluters pay for their pollution. It's not the only tool. And, what's really, I think, important is what is the cost of not doing something about climate change, and it's just so much higher than any kind of the cost that we could put on carbon. So I think you see
carbon's the biggest contributor to climate change, right? I mean, and carbon being the substance that most commonly comes from coal-powered power plants.
Right, and we've seen under the Trump administration, carbon's emissions start going back up. They rolled back the Clean Power Plan that the Obama administration had put in place to put limits on coal-fired power plant carbon emissions. And so what we're looking for from the presidential candidates on the Democratic side now is what's the plan to kind of go beyond what we had with the Clean Power Plan and really tackle carbon emissions and
with an eye towards driving down those emissions
and transitioning to 100% clean energy.
Exactly. Almost all of the plans call for pretty aggressive goals for the country to reach a carbon neutral state, 100% of the electricity generated from renewable clean sources. But the idea of a carbon tax is basically one tool the Democrats say they might have if they were in power to try to reach that goal.
Are you surprised by the names that weren't on the list supporting a carbon tax? I didn't see Joe Biden on there, Amy Klobuchar, some of the moderates, Steve Bullock of Montana, Tim Ryan of Ohio, coal country, not on this list.
Right,
so there's a divide there.
The tax is kind of punitive, whereas some of these other candidates are suggesting things like investments in batteries, investments in storage, investments in updating the power grid. That's more proactive but less punitive towards companies that don't make those efforts on their own.
All right, let's talk about the issue of nuclear power. That's a zero-emission energy source in this country, but not without some complications, right, Craig? And there's a divide there as well.
Look, you can't talk about nuclear power without talking about what do we do with the waste,
and
how do we store that, and the real risks involved with that. So any plan that includes more nuclear especially, needs to figure out what is the solution for storing that waste and keeping communities safe.
And we just saw on the screen, Mary Alice, there are a handful of candidates that want to actually expand the use of nuclear energy. Among them, some of the moderates we were just talking about, John Delaney, businessman, Andrew Yang, Joe Biden.
Right, and if you follow sort of climate politics closely, like you guys do, this is a long-standing debate in the environmental community whether or not nuclear energy should be included at all when groups talk about renewable power. A lot of folks say this is one of the cleanest forms of energy. Others say the waste is still a problem. Insurance is still a problem. And it will continue to be a debate within that community. But it's not just nuclear. There's debates about fracking, natural gas, where the line should be for what's done on public lands. And it's in those fine-tuned details that we start to see some of the differences between Democrats.
There's some unique proposals on the table, too, as you know, from some of these candidates. I want to get your temperature on these, Craig. A divide over one idea that's been floated by a couple of candidates to declare a national emergency on climate. Bernie Sanders and Tom Steyer have been pushing this. Would that be a helpful idea?
I think we have to go all out on climate change, and whether that is declaring an emergency or not, but we have to have the government firing on all cylinders, like starting on day one of the next presidency. So bringing every kind of tool in the arsenal of the federal government to do that is what's most important, and what we really need to see a plan from every candidate about that is serious about being the next president.
We've seen from this administration that using that tool of declaring a national emergency can help could help an administration, in theory, move funds around as they see fit and bypass congressional allocations of funds.
And there are even some more aggressive, controversial, perhaps, ideas on the table. Some of the candidates, three of them, I believe, have advocated for actually relocating communities with government support away from the coast. Julian Castro has promoted voluntary relocation. Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang, entire community relocation. That's sort of a novel idea, is one way to put it.
I mean, look, we have to talk about adaptation and protecting communities, and as well as mitigating against climate change. But I think we have to be realistic about what we can start doing now to get us back on track so that we don't hopefully get to the point of having to relocate communities. But
do you think there's things that can be done before it gets to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely so many things we have to start doing, and the Trump administration is taking us backwards rather than doubling down on those things. We need to be accelerating clean energy, and we need to be investing more in climate resilient infrastructure, and we need to start doing those things like yesterday.
In big picture, as we wrap this fascinating conversation, it's interesting to note Joe Biden, our polling frontrunner, at least at this stage in the race, isn't listed under a number of those umbrellas that we just showed our viewers. He, of course, supports supports the things that all the candidates do back in the Paris Climate Accord, setting zero carbon emissions by 2050. But some of the more controversial ideas he sort of shied away from. Where do you guys fall on that? That's sort of been a disappointment to climate activists and progressives.
You know, look, I think Vice President Biden has a really strong plan about how to address climate change, and we're going to look forward to seeing more ideas from his campaign and all the other campaigns about what else they're going to do to build on those plans. Rejoining Paris is just like the most basic first step, and then how are they going to build on our commitment and get the world to do more as well. So, I think all these plans are really important and really great, and we want to see more, and we want to see, all the candidates, including Vice President Biden and others, talking more and more every day on the campaign trail about how they're going to start addressing climate change on day one.
When we were talking before we started about this idea, I think you had the phrase, it was a good phrase, a passion index, that we've heard Democratic voters that are passionate on this issue try to get a sense of which candidates are really going to dive in on day one. If there's a lot to do on health care for Democrats or a lot to do on minimum wage for Democrats, but also climate, which are the candidates that are actually going to move on their plans, prioritize their plans? And that's where Joe Biden might have a harder time convincing some of the Democratic activists.
And something that voters will likely feel out themselves as they watch these candidates on the debate stage tonight on a cable channel, certainly at the ABC News debate on September 12th. Craig, thank you so much for coming in and helping us digest that. Mary Alice is going to stick around for another perspective on all this. We're joined now by Mandy Gunasekura. She's a former EPA official in the Trump administration's environmental agency, also the founder of Energy 45, a nonprofit that's aimed at promoting the president's energy agenda from the outside. Mandy, thanks so much for coming in.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So let's pick up where we just left off with Craig and talking about the Democratic field. How concerned are you? How concerned should Republicans be about this issue of climate change? Is it a crisis?
I don't think it's something that Republicans should be concerned about in terms of what the voters see. President Trump has done a good job at growing the economy while continuing to improve the environment in terms of clean air, clean water, cleaning up lands, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a winning issue from the Republicans' perspective. We know how to move the trajectory in terms of improving these outcomes without raising taxes, killing off entire industries, or making the price of electricity go up.
So just so I'm understanding, so you see a need to improve outcomes. That suggests there's a problem, or you see it as a problem, not a crisis, or do you agree with the president that it's a hoax?
I think the president has spoken more recently that it differentiates his previous claims about it being a hoax, but his administration and under his leadership has been taking very aggressive actions in terms of improving the environment and reducing greenhouse gases. So yes, I agree. I think you state it rightly. It's a problem. It's something we should pay attention to. It is an important issue, but it's not something that should justify the extreme policies, the trillion-dollar takeovers that we're seeing from the Democrat candidates.
This administration has gotten some criticism from big oil and gas development companies, even ExxonMobil in the last few weeks, as it's proposed rolling back some regulations. I was reading about the proposals to roll back some regulations dealing with methane emissions, and ExxonMobil basically put out a statement saying that they didn't think it was such a good idea to roll back those regulations. ExxonMobil wanted to continue an idea that natural gas could be done in a clean manner where methane was kept pretty low. How is this administration grappling with the fact that even oil and gas companies don't seem to support some of the deregulation?
Well, it's some of the oil and gas companies, and they tend to be the bigger corporations that, frankly, their bottom line isn't impacted by additional regulatory costs. But they're one voice in terms of what the administration has to take into account when they're making these decisions. Other big voices and important voices are the small to mid-size methane extractors, producers, transporters that would be significantly harmed by the existing regulatory structure. And one more point on that, it's important to know that methane is the commodity that producers are trying to sell. So there is a business interest to control and ensure that there are minimized leaks, number one. And number two, this isn't done in a vacuum. There's other existing regulatory requirements in place that ensure that anyone, whether a small, medium, or large corporation, is undergoing these sorts of activities, they're doing it in an environmentally friendly way. So the quote-unquote rollback was getting rid of unnecessary regulatory requirements while maintaining the regulations that actually work and produce the results that matter.
And finally, Mandy, you've been dubbed one of the architects of the Trump administration's decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Accords a year or so ago. If one of these Democrats becomes president of the United States and the United States rejoins the Paris Accords, how damaging would that be in your view? Is there really much to that, more than the symbolism of the targets that's set in that agreement?
Well, I think it would be problematic because it would be rejoining a completely ineffective agreement. What you've seen in terms of the Paris climate signatories, those that are still in and those that are some of the leaders around that movement, their emissions have gone up while they've embraced these huge regulatory style policy proposals that we're seeing from the Democrat candidates. And so the real issue here is the regulatory actions that would then be imposed on the American economy in the name of complying with the Paris Climate Accord. And that's where the real harm would occur. And that's why the president made the decision to get out, because at the end of the day, he wanted to grow the economy, he wanted to protect the environment, but not at the behest of American jobs.
Mandy Gunasekura with Energy 45, a former Trump administration EPA official. Thanks so much for coming in, Mandy.
Thank you for having me.
And our thanks to Deputy Political Director Mary Alice Parks. Much more from her in the note at abcnews.com. Thanks, Mary Alice. Next, over to the Pentagon now, and the president's controversial decision to shift $3.6 billion in military construction funding to build 175 miles of border wall after the Supreme Court declined to uphold an injunction temporarily blocking the use of that money. Pentagon officials say they are now planning to move forward, and 127 projects will be affected by this, but they haven't identified them yet. Louis Martinez joins us now. He's over at the Pentagon, eagerly awaiting those details, Louis, because a lot of members of Congress, and especially Democrats, of course, are preparing to sound off on money that could be taken away from their districts and their projects.
No, you're exactly right, Devin. The Pentagon has been briefing congressional officials all day, going to individual members, telling them which projects in their districts are the ones that are going to be affected. What we know is that there's going to be $1.8 billion that's going to come from projects stateside. An additional $1.8 billion is going to come from projects overseas. So that's kind of lessen the impact stateside, if you will. But what we're hearing already, some of these members of Congress are already releasing statements after they've been briefed. We know that the Virginia delegation, we have Senator Kaine. He says that about $75 million in projects in the Norfolk area are going to be affected. They include a warehouse for hazmat materials in Norfolk, another similar facility in Portsmouth, Virginia, and then a cyber operations facility at Langley, Eustis. We also have statements from Senators Gillibrand and Schumer in New York. They are the ones who, obviously, Senate Minority Leader Schumer, he's been very vocal about how this program that the president is doing with the funding is actually making America less safe. In his opinion, apparently $160 million worth of projects at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point are going to be affected.
Louis, are you surprised? Sorry to interrupt you there, but we're hearing a lot from Democrats. Are you surprised that there have been so few Republicans to speak out about this? And any rumblings, even privately at the Pentagon, that so much money is being shifted away from these initiatives?
You know, I can't speak for the Republicans right now, but I'm sure that they will be speaking out shortly after the Pentagon talks about this publicly at some point later today. Right, with all the details. We are, as you said, we've been eagerly anticipating this list that's going to come out. But one of the things that we have heard from officials is that they are looking for things that could be delayed down the road. And one thing that we do know is that in the presidential budget request for the Pentagon that came out earlier this year, the Pentagon is already looking to backfill this money, this $3.6 billion, so that in their terms, in their mind, this is just a delay in the projects as opposed to a permanent cutoff. But we know from hearing Democratic members up on the Hill, they are totally opposed to that because they think that that's just a backdoor way of them funding this 175 miles of wall.
And we will await those details. Louis, we know you'll bring them to us right here on ABC News Live. Thank you so much, Louis Martinez. At the Pentagon, finally today, we take note of an extraordinary appearance last night by Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the former American president who appointed her, Bill Clinton. They appeared together on stage at the Clinton Presidential Center in Arkansas, where they traded memories of their first conversation together back in the Oval Office in '93.
I was so engrossed with her story when we were sitting there, and I just kept peppering her with questions, that I suddenly felt that I was really not interviewing somebody for the Supreme Court at all. I was just a guy talking to somebody that I really liked and that I hoped could be a part of our future.
It was very easy to talk to the president. We talked about constitutional law. After all, he was a constitutional law professor. We talked about family. We talked about many things. And I've had the experience with some men that they have a certain discomfort talking to a woman. That was not that way with President Clinton.
And a lot of talk on social media about what she could have been alluding to there. Senior national correspondent Terry Moran is here, covers the court. Terry, striking to see these two together. I can't even remember them together maybe since he appointed Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That in itself was extraordinary.
That is extraordinary. By tradition of recent vintage, but nevertheless over the past several decades, justices don't hang out with the presidents who appointed them. They try and keep their distance to demonstrate their independence. This was different, but think about it. In the Me Too era, an era that Ruth Ginsburg's life work has in part helped to create, helped to vindicate and prosecute justice for victims of sexual violence, there she is standing next to a man who has been credibly accused, at the very least, of sexual violence by Juanita Broderick, by Paula Jones, by Kathleen Willey, by others, is now caught up in the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Took 26 flights with Epstein, says there was nothing untoward, but there will be more investigation in that. And Clinton has a pattern of denying it first and then getting caught. It is striking to see it, and it runs the risk of damaging that cause.
At least the appearance. It struck many here in the newsroom that her allusion there, her cracking a joke, perhaps she was referring to those women. Perhaps, you know, Bill Clinton does have a tradition or a reputation of being very easy with everyone.
With everyone. When he fixes his gaze on you, those blue eyes, you are the only person in the world. And he also has a reputation of doing great stuff on policy for women and women's rights and working easily and comfortably.
Took a victory lap on that front last night. We should say as a footnote, Terry, that she looked quite good. Less than 2 weeks after receiving radiation therapy for that malignant tumor on her pancreas, and she is expected back in the court next month. We know you'll be tracking that. Terry Moran, thanks for that analysis. Thank you for joining us here in the briefing room. On this Wednesday, I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Hope to see you right back here tomorrow.